so my name is Ken Pyle. I am a partner and exploit developer at a firm named Cyber. I do exploit development, offensive work. I'm a really prolific zero-day hunter. So we do managed services, giving you the whole spiel. Hey, we do managed services, data security, breach response, digital forensics. I'm primarily, as I tell people, I live on the very red side of purple. Like very red side of purple. I get called in, it was like, has anybody ever seen this? Have you ever give your view on it? I'm also a graduate professor of cybersecurity at Chestnut Hill College. I teach applied cryptography, advanced exploit development, cyber warfare stuff, refinement of exploits, what have you. Can't have to give you the plug because I'm here, whatever. But I'm going to be very clear about this. None of the opinions I'm expressing in this presentation are representative of either of those institutions. So you know where this is going. All right. This is actually my academic research I've been working on for a really, really long time. And I'm going to, as I put this presentation together, it looks very small, but I'm building up from the bottom to something really big. And it all starts with some very basic concepts. One of the things I try to tell people is, I am a really, really prolific exploiter of critical infrastructure. If you know, I'm the person, if anybody heard about the emergency alert system getting hacked last year, that was me. The Ruckus Andoru botnet that got started earlier this year caused a big problem on the KEV. That's me. Some other stuff. And I always tell people this, like, I love my job. I am super passionate. I love this. I've been doing this since I was 6 years old. I was on a 2400 baud modem doing this. I do some really serious work. We all do some really serious work. But it is really important to not take yourself too seriously. So when I popped the emergency alert system and my picture was getting broadcast all over the world, I made sure to troll goth fans with my favorite New Order CD. The keys to set off emergency alert system alerts across the United States are actually hidden behind that CD. But the whole point of it is we do really serious work and we get really tied up into it. And like, there's this problem we have in the industry of everybody like aiming guns at each other. I'm an exploiter, I'm a hacker, and I have to talk to AppSec people constantly. And it's always adversarial, and it doesn't need to be. It's also not very difficult. All the things I'm going to show you here are literally basic concepts things that I'm sure you read in the first 5 pages of anything you ever read. So if you ask yourself a couple questions of how do I know some of these things, or how did I figure some of this out? My full confession is this. I used to be an MSP engineer. I used to be a security and network engineer. And I know because I'm sitting in a room of AppSec people, I will tell you flat out, it's not always the network, but this time it kind of is. But it's your fundamental lack of understanding of how the network works that makes what I'm going to show you happen. And I want the light bulbs to start going off. So people ask me this, how do you find 0 days? Break out the crayons. On the engineering side, we hate doing this. I hate having to explain myself to people. You have to. You guys got to be a little bit more cool with us on our side, and we'll be a little bit better on your side, but that's causing these problems. How do you find 0 days? It's as simple as reading the effing manual. I tell people this all the time. Understand what you are actually working at. If you're an AppSec person, your application is transmitted in some way over a network, correct? You should probably learn how that road works and all the off-ramps and ways to hijack it through application security. I always tell people be eternally cynical, skeptical. If somebody tells you they did something, double check anyway. The big problem we have with supply chain management software, stuff like this, is we're all depending on the person behind us or next to us to have done their job and actually read the manual. Turns out it's the complete opposite. Don't give up. If you find something new, and I'm going to show you something that's brand new, a new type of HTTP exploit I came up with, and I knew what I had, but I had to protect it because people were trying to actively not let me talk about it. Not just this situation, it's a bunch of, and sometimes you just have to, as an engineer, lower yourself to the pity of explaining the network to plebes who don't know anything. That's BS, man. Like, as a very good friend of mine, an amazing hacker, John Vanderveer, said, great hacking is just great system administration. That's living off the land, right? Living off the land is taking what the defense gives you to accomplish something you want to do. So I did it. So I'm going to break out the crayons a little bit. Like I said, I'm going to explain through this, and it's going to look weirdly weird. I'm going to snap something else on. It's all going to click together. Breaking out the crayons, living off the land, finding new exploits is all about one thing. What is the difference between the way you intended this application to be working and how it's actually designed, right? I intended for this application to provide a login. As designed, it allows you to inject things into the login page and obtain access, right? That's how it works. Going back to that, sanitization of input, if I can tell one other thing to application developers, is that sanitization of input needs to happen on both sides and anytime information comes in and leaves. And there is more implication from that other than an API call or an HTTP request. And now this is why I'm saying it's kind of about the network, but it's a fundamental lack of understanding. The lack of understanding of the OSI model, and trust me, there is no greater abuse in technology than the first 100 pages of every book you've ever read that explains the OSI model for the 900th time, right? But it's actually important, and you should actually learn it, because I'm old. I feel like I'm coming back from the future to warn everybody about something that happened. I'm old, and some of the tricks I'm using are things that I've been using for 30 years. Because what happened? They were known about, nobody fixed them. It's like the last person standing in the room and everybody forgot that old knowledge. And when I wonder whether that, like it's just forgotten, it goes into the ether. And the last thing I tell people is sometimes you actually need to write the manual to explain it to people. So, here's the story. I'll give you the background story, how it got to this, and how it snaps together. So Connectwise control and their applications are set for MSPs and large organizations to do endpoint management, right? You've had some version, Kaseya, Connectwise, there's all these different things that allow MSPs or large corporations to manage all their endpoints, jump in, yada, yada, yada. I began disclosing my work in October 22 to them. After disclosing it and being responsible, they started saying it was minimally impactful, but they still patched it. In addition to that, several IR firms, because a lot of people in that side of the world know me, and came out to me and said, I heard you're on some hot stuff, can you tell me? I shared it, and I always said, as I always say, I'll share what I know. Just do me a favor, don't share it with anybody. Don't, keep it quiet until I talk about it. Because it's not a fame thing, this is actually a pretty big deal. After attempting this and being called overblown, ridiculous, whatever else, it's not a big deal, and after all the patching, I finally just said, I'm done with this. I'm going to MITRE, and I'm just going to ask for the CVEs. So after being called overblown, this wasn't a big deal, my CVEs were classified as a 9.8. Not only that, on December 1st, Krebs posted an article about it, how I published a blog post around my findings, and coincidentally, Connectwise released an advisory warning about phishing campaigns, client-side exploitation, and all these other things that bear a lot of similarities to what I did. I'm not here to talk about that, but I'll say this. All you really needed to do all of this is sitting there in the right-hand corner. I just never explained it to anybody. Because it was like, if this is the game that's going to get played, I'm just going to go talk about it, and that's the end of it. Going a little further, a third-party company who did some analysis of this posted a public analysis and comments on my work stating it wasn't a big deal. And I'm not here to talk about them. It's not the story about them, but I will say there are a number of potential omissions and issues in this analysis. So instead of going in a fight with them, I checked their homework. So there's your CVEs. One of the things I'll tell you is that analysis does not ever mention that those things are actually, a little ridiculous. But let's talk with it. How does living off the land start? It starts with understanding how things work. In the top left corner is basically your average, hey, this is a switching network with a router and firewall. Bottom's the OSI model. The top right, I'm going to explain it to you in a minute. But living off the land is basically this, and you could read it. Taking advantage of things like abusing PowerShell, Visual Basic, WMI, PSExec, Mimikatz, all of these things that it exploits the functionality of a system to hijack it for nefarious purposes. That's living off the land. Abusing something you're given to do it. It may include tactics like DLL hijacking, hiding payloads, process dumping, downloading files, all these other things. Code execution, persistence, log evasion. These are all hallmarks of mega super APT groups, right? Like, they do live off the land, they can be detected. No, it's just knowing how a computer works. Nobody on my side of the house wants to tell you it's really as simple as knowing how to launch a command shell, right? So after all of this and everything else, my work was repeatedly acknowledged as defeating controls, internally reproducible, sharing traits with APT groups. I directly disclosed it prior to any public notification by them, and it's being actively exploited. Keep that in mind. So why don't you ask yourself this: if I'm going to build a botnet, what are the things that I really want? So on the left-hand side, I want a port scanner, C2 beaconing, tunneling, arbitrary request handler, amazing hosting that doesn't go down, code signing, trusted execution, exfiltration, implantation, client-side exploitation. For me, that's a fully functioning botnet with all the tooling I need. On the right-hand side, what would I love to have? I'd love to be able to bypass everybody's firewall rules, something that has no monitoring, poor user habits. I would love to get access to somebody else's trusted SSL and code signing certificates to sign my malware with. I want to drop catch domains so I can catch people when their instances expire and I can phish them. I want to be able to send my phishing emails through a trusted SMTP source, like their hosted cloud instance that enables you to do all of that through a hosted solution. And this is the thing about, think about HTTP API protocol fuzzing. I'll show you how that works, but think about this in the context of your applications. With abusing a little trick with server-side request forgery, I have a really amazing little thing to show you. I want to bypass A controls. This bypasses AV and EDR controls. I know it does. Even better, if all of this can be free to you instead of spending thousands of dollars in hosting, and I really am after is getting code past everything. There's all those controls in place that make things stop happening. Now, what's perfect for that? RMM software. And I'm not picking on Connectwise because you can go look at my critical CVEs on all kinds of MSP software. Kaseya happened in 2020, right? 2019, I alerted them to a very similar kind of issue and said, you got to fix this. Why? Why do I go after this piece of software? It's poorly managed. People disable controls to make this work, and I'm going to show you a specific example for every one of these points. It provides system access in Windows. So I'm the kernel, right? Normal looking, so if I want to phish people and I figure out that who your MSP is or your company is, I can just make it look like it came from them. Gives me access to everything, and here's the important part. I can either maintain persistence or I can make it temporary and leave very few, if any, forensic IOCs. That's what I go after. I want to be not detected. And again, all of this is free. You don't need $1 to your name to set all of this up. Now, let's talk about this. Many people and this is I'm talking about specifically, but you got to think about this in the context of your application, how you're designing things. People disable security controls because software is either over-designed or there's deployment complexities, and what people try to do, we all do, is design so it works absolutely everywhere, no matter the infrastructure. What you're looking at here is on the left-hand side, and I'll read it so you can't see it. It's a posting from a Zscaler forum, the support forum. I'm having problem with Connectwise connecting to a direct IP. At the bottom there it says, way we fixed this was on our SSL inspection, we accepted and allowed *.screenconnect.com, but we should have used screenconnect.com. So, think about it this way. If you asterisk the domain name for disabling security controls, as long as I have a subdomain existing in there and resolving what has just happened, you have disabled all inspection of SSL for anything coming from there. That's really important. On the right-hand side, you have another one where it says, I'm having an oddball issue with Screen Connect where the agent can't connect back to Screen Connect, so it just keeps retrying. If I disable, decrypt, and scan, it'll just work fine. I've whitelisted screenconnect.com, including all domain names. And the bottom one is a moderator saying, please show a picture of the edit of this configuration. Starting to get it now? So, even further, there is really poor management of their cloud instances of registering FQDNs. What you're looking at is some company that I dug out of security trails that has a screenconnect.com subdomain for their old instance, except it was retired for a year. I did some OSINT, I went out, I registered their domain to me, started a Connectwise instance, and I now own their FQDN for it. So if you didn't go back and disable all of those changes that you made to your security controls for any of this, what have I just done? Right through. And I prove it. Further complicating this fact is that every single cloud instance, even trials that you get, issues the same wildcard SSL certificate to absolutely every instance. Anybody do cryptography like me? What is the first rule of public key cryptography? Control of the key and registration and knowing it. So this is a really good cert. It's like a high-grade cert. So anybody, whether you're a corporate customer paying millions of dollars or whatever, or some idiot like me with some free time in a basement, I can go get the same SSL certificate for you. And remember, everybody's keying on the wild card. And they don't inspect SSL either, do they? Awesome. So there's another certificate that exists in all of this. A code signing certificate. When you download their agent for installing these things, it's signed, but it's a click once installer. And there is a small little space in here in which the code signing certificate doesn't apply. It's unregulated space in a signed executable. You're all AppSec people. Is that something you're supposed to do? How much is that cert now worth? $0. I'm not saying, but you're like, it's worthless. It doesn't do anything. I can go in there and edit that space and it won't break the certificate. So how are the two ways that EDR and AV work? Hash banning and code signing. By changing this space and injecting whatever I want in here, it changes the hash of the file. And that changes every time you start a session. So you can't hash ban it. So the only other trust control you can anchor this on, other than watching behavior, is a code signing certificate that doesn't actually do anything. See how this is all starting to snowball a little bit? All right. To make matters worse, the download of that signed executable that gives you system access, all these other things on whatever, is transmitted via HTTP, which is plain text. So by transmitting a weakly signed, can't hash ban it executable over a network via plain text, I can essentially, without any social engineering or interaction, backdoor that thing when people are downloading. Not only that, you can man-in-the-middle it, proxy it, or just directly edit the file and download it from anybody's public instance. Top right left corner, this thing executed that malformed HTTP request to that IP address via that signed client that I manually edited and man-in-the-middled, and it worked. It executed an arbitrary HTTP request to a host of my designation inside of a signed executable. Checkmate, right? That's the first 10 seconds of this. Because all of these things violate the CIA triad. There's no integrity. You can use this to do some availability problems. It's in the CVE, and it's definitely not maintaining cryptographic control. So I'm going to rewind a little bit and go back to third-party analysis. And I want to read this to you. Third-party companies are giving out some pretty flawed advice, and I don't think maybe they understand exactly how the AppSec or product works. I'm going to read you an analysis they had on another case to you, and I want you to put this together in your head. This simply means that hackers could register for trials of control and potentially serve malicious JavaScript from an *screenconnect.com domain. Theoretically, this could be a building block for other attack chains, but it's not worth losing sleep over. Because this happens, and they're wildcarding, control of any server in their cloud domain FQDN DNS zone, whether inflected or injected, will allow you to perform client-side exploitation and bypass browser controls. Why? We are allowing script access from *screenconnect.com, right? It's not a theory. In fact, I'm giving you only one weaponized example of this. As long as you can figure out how to get something on that, it goes nuclear. Now think about this in an AppSec perspective. I'm downloading an executable file, an agent, that doesn't have any effective framing mitigations. Does anybody know what that does? Download a file via a frame and it's a click once, or no click downloader. It will just download it because it's injected in a frame. So if I can come up with a malicious agent, put it in another instance and find a web page that I can inject content into, I can now install without a click an agent on anybody's computer, which gives you access to everything. Now that you have this, you're probably asking yourself, how do I weaponize this? How do you live off the land? Well, living off the land is understanding how things work, right? So why not just make it an unauthenticated signed exploit factory and delivery method? It's a signed Windows executable that you can't hash ban, that's always excluded, but not only that, it works across multiple operating systems, signed or unsigned. It executes arbitrary requests and other things that I'm not talking about to targeted endpoints. Because of it's a network thing that goes back to a DNS name or an IP address, it resolves it and creates requests from it. It's an arbitrary HTTP or command executing application that's signed with somebody's legitimate sign cert. Now here's where it gets crazy. You already know about this, doesn't require it, but look at the top right corner. As long as I have a cloud instance, an on-premise instance, I can sign executables with their code signing certificate. Even an unlicensed on-premise version of it that has a trial that was never licensed. Hint, hint. It works. So here's a signed exploit factory. I'm the guy who came up with the EndurUBot one. I came up with the Cisco Dell one that became a big problem. Why do I make every one of my exploits that are web-based, I try to get them to GET requests? Because they're client deliverable. They're not posts, I just have to craft a good URL. So what you can do is embed my exploits, which give you remote code execution, complete control of network infrastructure, by bouncing it out of an executable, somebody downloads it, and because they're inside somebody's firewall, it will execute that to wherever I want. That's how you bypass a firewall. If you don't believe me and you want to test this out for yourselves, and that you can actually inject this, here's the exploit. This will compromise Cisco, Dell, Netgear, D-Link, Linksys. There's a whole slew of switches that have this. And it really is as simple as pointing it to the right IP address, feeding it about 1,200 characters, and then putting a certain character in there, and it reboots the switch, which stops all of your applications from working. But why would I give you that exploit as part of that? Because remember how I said you can man in the middle of the download? What do you need to do that? It's a room full of AppSec people, and they don't know this is important. What happens in the first 15 seconds you reboot a switch? ARP table flushes. What do you need to do man in the middle? Control of ARP and MAC. So if you want to test out man in the middling the download, get a switch, send it that exploit, and do this, and you can completely recreate my work in about 10 seconds. Don't believe me? That's the default IP address for those switches. So what I do is I control external domains with internally resolvable IP addresses, like the default IP addresses for everybody's switch, or most of them. Spray them out, and eventually you're going to get a hit. Even more to the point, I'm not just talking about Windows executables, and this is important. I did a lot of work on this, nobody read it. I'm one of the leading exploiters of a format called JNLP, Java Network Launch Protocol. It actually launches Java and works across any operating system that has Java in it. So this injection problem doesn't just exist in the Windows executable. Every kind of agent, exe, Debian, Windows, Linux, they all suffer from this problem where you can inject into space like this to get it to do these things. All this is a downloader, like a click once installer. It just goes out and retrieves something, but I have control of what it retrieves. So now that you have all that, how do you actually exploit this in a meaningful way? What if I did have a way to theoretically inject things into ScreenConnect.com's domain without them ever knowing? So put that aside for a second and look at this. You have this malicious code factory. How do I start delivering it? And remember all those tools I told you I built out? How do I do it? So here's my moment. For the past year, I have been routing, abusing, using the Connectwise cloud service under their noses after informing them of this. And I've been collecting POC for C2 beaconing, bypassing firewall rules, tunneling malicious files, creating a giant DDoS cannon, botnet creation, client-side exploitation, port scanning and API access to external and internal hosts at Connectwise, arbitrary HTTP requests on arbitrary ports, and exfiltration and implantation of malicious code. How did I do it? Because of one web page and how that software works. Why? Because software developers don't know how a network works. I'm going to explain it. It's going to look all complex, but I did it a really simple way here. All you really need are 3 GET requests. If you look at this, the top one is how I made it into a port scanner and an arbitrary HTTP and API fuzzer. The second one is a content brooder you can use like Durbuster to scan people's things. And the last one is a client-side exploitation method of something I'm going to show you that I've never showed anybody before. Or you can just go to my GitHub and I'll give you the Python scripts. As you'll see, none of this requires anything other than a knowledge of the things on the left-hand side. Doesn't require a credit card. I host all of my stuff in Screen Connect's own cloud. I registered for a trial instance and anonymously, and I've been hosting it for a long time. You don't need, I'm hosting everything out of Amazon EC2 for free, and I'm going to give you the free Python scripts. In fact, if you take pictures, I have them all up here for you. So it starts with this web page. Oh, yikes, hold on. My battery's got to cut out, hold on. There we go. Okay, sorry. My battery was going out. All right, this page, how do you live off the land with Screen Connect? If you go to that web page right now, I'm pretty sure it's still up. What is this page? Remember the difference between intended and as designed. So this is the intended design. Use our port test tool to determine the external accessibility of your Screen Connect instance. If you have changed ports or are hosting at a different IP or host name, you'll need to change those values accordingly. So ask yourself this. What happens when I submit this post request? I control the DNS record, I control the port. The answer is this. I can control the port the request goes to, the host it goes to, and it's not coming from my IP address. It's a server-side request forgery. If you look it up, it's coming from their IP address. And I'm doing this over an anonymous VPN. So think about what's happening. When I submit this request, the server receives this request from me, get or post. The server at 52.202.11.141 processes that record and performs 3 to 5 DNS requests. It then creates a new HTTP request to the user control port on and it's coming from the targeted IP address. So if you have a firewall that says *.screenconnect.com, you have whitelisted everything coming out of this. Make sense? Follow me so far? All right. The page then returns a status of this. So the web server one, it just says succeeded. So if it connected, it got a 200 code, it says succeeded. It's a blind SSRF, right? Okay. As intended, this is designed to let users of the software test ports and HTTP access no matter where they are. It's a diagnostic tool. Because people change ports in DNS, or they use dynamic DNS for this, they change it. So the diagnostic tool has to be able to do that. It's unauthenticated and totally public because an MSP or a large corporate customer might need to test this. Now put this together in your head. What do you think the egress firewall rules on that host are? If you can scan on any port going out, what are the firewall rules going out? Okay. All ports are open. Got it? All right. So what's happening is it's creating a DNS request. Going deep into this, I don't want to go too deep into it, but just understand it's 3 to 5 DNS requests and then the HTTP request. It's also effectively operating as a proxy for me. Every server-side request forgery is a proxy. It's a limited proxy but it is indeed proxying traffic. So working as designed, this is a port scanner, a proxy, a firewall bypass, backdoor access to people's HTTP and API. Remember how it's generating 5 to 7 requests every time and it doesn't do any sort of rate limiting? That's a DDoS attack. Just flood it. Trust me. You can do C2 beaconing. You can enumerate content. You can fish from it. It bypasses AV because everybody's disabling this stuff. I have the malicious code signing thing, and I now have access to Connectwise's internal network. Who wants to call me on that one? I will explain why in a minute. But look on the bottom right-hand corner. That's a port scan script I wrote, abusing that function. Do you see that lb.corp.xyz? Here's one of my nefarious things that I never tell the developers. None of you actually likes to go look at DNS requests, especially externally injected ones. So I maintain a bunch of really funny zones. So corp.xyz is one that a lot of corporations used to use. But if you query lb.corp.xyz, it resolves to 127.0.0.1. Making sense now, right? But I'm not going to get there yet. What I want to get there is this. 2 one-way communication channels equal 1 two-way communication channel, right? I got this way. All I'm really doing is 3 lights make a left turn. So I turned this into an effective C2 exfiltration, DNS, and HTTP beacon, similar to HTTP exfiltration, like staging, or iodine C2, which is DNS-based, right? How did I do it? I just encoded in that HTTP request that gets generated, I added a base 64 payload to the end of it, sent it to an external host, and if you decrypt it, it says cyber POC. That's a message encoded over base 64, exfiltrated through a trusted host, and signaling something to me in a way they've never found, right? Instant win. What happens when you're requesting that? It sends that request via user control port as their IP address. This is going to get very important. Not my IP address. Good luck doing forensics on that. Good luck doing IR on that. How I'm creating an arbitrary HTTP generator is, at the end of that web server box, you can actually put slashes and RESTful stuff. But as long as you put the anchor tag at the end of it, it snips off all the other stuff at the end that they add on, making it a completely arbitrary HTTP request generator. Why the anchor tag? What does it do in a browser? You guys disregard it because it's an anchor tag for the browser, not for that. They're snipping it off. So all you need to do is put in that web server host, the FQDN, whatever the URL is, and put an anchor tag at the end, and it's going to forward out that exact thing. I told them about this in December of 2022, and as of July 15th, the day I got the acceptance from the CFP, I immediately generated this to prove it was still possible. AppSec Village, ASV DC31, and if you decrypt the base 64 value in there, it has a funny little message for you. Proof of concept, but get the F out. There it is. I'm not even done. This is the beginning. If you see this right here, it says succeeded, right? It's giving me a message, it definitely connected, right? So what happens if I start feeding that form malicious input? Like the loopback interface. This is an external and internal port scanner because it's coming from that host. All you need to do, and there's the Python script for doing it, is to basically iterate through every port for your target host, parse the returned message it gives you in that page, and that's a port scanner. If you have gone out to your firewall and disabled controls or allowed firewall rules from asterisk.screenconnect.com, what have you done? You've given me backdoor access because it's coming from somebody else's IP. Don't believe I'm scanning the inside of their network? Here you go. Here's the URL. If you use lb.corp.xyz on the relay one, put in the port box 3389 and click test, whatever you put in that teleprompter, Ron Burgundy's going to read. It resolves to 127.0.0.1, and it performs a TCP connection to 3389. Is that externally accessible? No, it is not. I win. And it all comes because nobody understands the OSI model. This is an application using the network, but nobody really thinks of what the network's doing. Web applications are layer 7. Network security and that kind of stuff is layer 2 and 3. All of the things that I'm bypassing are not anything web application developers tend to think about. So how did I do this? How am I scanning behind people's firewalls, beyond VLANs? The only connectivity between those two, their internal network, me, other ones, is a layer 7 traffic crafter that is available on multiple subnets, right? It's weakly controlled, and because I can inject external IP addresses internal IP addresses to external DNS, if I feed it one of their internal IP addresses for their cloud instance, I am now tunneling HTTP traffic or regular traffic to stuff inside their firewall. That makes sense? Not difficult, right? Am I overblown? I don't think so, right? I should not be able to do this under any circumstances, ever, period. So there's your Python script for doing it, and that's how I scanned their internal network with it. So you're probably at this point, great, you got a couple tools, what's the big deal? This is a blind server-side request forgery, right? Incorrect. Everything is a proxy if you try hard enough. Exactly. Okay. Well, when the content on the other side isn't available, it actually returns the HTTP status code to you of what just happened. So my arbitrary HTTP request is now getting back HTTP status codes telling me what happened. Isn't that Durbuster? Isn't that a brute force content enumerator? So if you want to enumerate the content of anything, there's my Python script. If you look at the bottom, you just need a file with all your directory names called content.txt. And it'll go through and you'll get reliable return codes out of all of that. So it's not so blind anymore, is it? Okay, here's the new thing that I invented. I'm pretty sure I invented it. Nobody knows. I've looked around about it. Here's the crazy part, and this is one of the things I know from 1980-something, or 90-something, sorry, more accurate, sorry. Nobody actually cares about the content of HTTP status codes, right? How many of you are actually saving anything other than the 3-digit numerical, right? That's IIS, that's Apache. All they ever keep are the 3-digit status codes. Now here's the secret. They are entirely attacker controllable. I saw you look, I'm going to prove it, hold on. Those status codes, the text, 200 OK, 400, all those, the text that appears after it is not saved. Nobody looks at it, nobody wants to keep it. So what you can actually do is inject payloads into that message. And if something returns the text of that message to you via server-side request forgery, what have I just done? I am now directly injecting into their web pages my content hosted somewhere else. Remember that agent download? Going to become important. It leaves very few IOCs because nobody actually has that. But think about it this way. The IOCs that could tell you where that is are on a third-party server. And I'm not going to speak. It doesn't appear that they're monitoring this because I've been doing it for a year, and I've never been stopped. That code, right? So I invented my own HTTP status code called 666. HTTP status code 666 did not exist before this moment, but I am injecting into, as part of that code, my malicious page, or my malicious content. All the controls that's supposed to keep you from cross-site scripting and all those other things immediately disappear. What? Because this is directly integrated into that web page's content. It's proxying it, but it's not like sending it directly through. It's taking it, integrating it into that page as its own web page code and going. Right? Now look at the thing at the bottom. We used *screenconnect.com, but we should have used screenconnect.com. So all of this is hosted, or you can inject it through www.screenconnect.com. So is it a theory that I have a way of injecting malicious code into anything on their pages? Absolutely not. So all you really need to do is serve 666 as your error code, put in a cross-site scripting payload, and that is the world's simplest XSS. What you need is the Python listener to do this. And it's on the left-hand side. That's the code. So all I did, because their post requests can also be submitted as GET requests, I now have a client deliverable single URL that will trigger all of this reliably. Oh, wow, Ken, you popped a 1. Did a lot more than that. You can do all of this just by doing that, and that's the web page code. I'm returning 666 via that code, but if you see here in the input field at the bottom where I highlighted it, it's directly integrated into the web page code. Your browser thinks this is legitimate content coming from a trusted source. So how do you enumerate this? How do you find this cool new way of doing it? I'm a big proponent of none of our information or knowledge should be secret or esoteric, and this isn't all that hard to do all this stuff. It's a matter of logic. So I like using free tools instead of telling you to pay $15,000 for something. It's very simple. There is a diagnostic web page on the internet called httpstat.us. Whatever you put in the URL, it will return the error code for whatever you put in there. So if you put 418 at the end of that, it'll return a 418 code. How many people know what a 418 code is? How many people have actually ever used that in the real world? Okay, you're like the 3 people I've ever met that have ever actually used this for anything. You're not a teapot, you're a proxy. Because if your blind server-side request forgery returns 418, that's not something anybody uses. That immediately tells you they're not sanitizing. So if you got a blind server-side request forgery like I do, that's how I do it in Burp. That's exactly how I do this. Run every status code from 1 to 699, and if you get any sort of code that means anything, it's any kind of HTTP status code, you're in. Now here's where it gets silly. You have to understand what this is happening. I call it sanitization depth. On the right-hand side, you just have my custom error, but the application completely fails to actually sanitize any of the data that I'm injecting via that status code. Character markup, anything. So if you remember my talk from last year, I talked about how I figured out a way to do DNS and HTTP exfiltration via this. Malicious payloads that I want to transmit over this because it's a proxy, I have all these characters available, so now I can use base 64. And you can encode anything as a base 64 payload. So, what do you do? Well, if you want to tunnel live HTTP traffic to bypass a content filter, or you just want to traffic files through Connectwise port test, aka proxy chains, 2 one-way communication channels equal 1 communicate, right? So all I'm doing, this Python script, I inject an arbitrary URL in the web server thing, and then what I'm actually putting at the end is a base 64 encoded URL. My proxy hosted in Amazon parses that, goes out and retrieves the web page I asked for, and then returns it inside that status code. And I wrote a shim on the other side that picks it up and parses it all in 23 lines of Python code. It's really that easy. Now think about this. I am inheriting all the firewall rules. How do I prove that the only place on earth this could have come from was their server? Well, you can add to your Amazon EC2 rules that the only IP address on the entire world that can connect to that server that I'm serving is their IP address. Why did I do that? Because if you've got third-party IR companies trying to sniff around your stuff and you don't want them finding it, putting up firewall rules that prevent them from ever looking at what your payloads look like is a pretty good idea. So again, I've whitelisted screenconnect.com including domain names. So now it's basically an open network tunnel. So if you want to build a content filter bypass or just run a proxy, you can do the same exact thing. Now here's why it's important to inherit all these firewall rules. If you're in a highly secure critical infrastructure environment, many times the only IP address or network traffic you are allowed to pass outside the house is to the remote management software. Anything else gets dropped. Anybody else run their stuff like that? A lot of people run that, especially in high availability environments. So now that I have this available, I can now tunnel out to the internet and hence the world via that status code. It's the only IP it can go, so I put something up in my Amazon instance that picks up the request and does all the HTTP stuff. Right? Not a bit of social engineering so far, which was their big concern. Oh, you need social engineering for all of this. No. So all you really need to do is start a free EC2 server. I prefer elastic ones because they're anywhere and you can sign up anonymously and don't cost you $1. You just host this scripting out there, make a firewall rule that says the only thing that can attach via HTTP on port 80 is this, serve that code, and you win. So I've been serving malicious POC and assigned executables to their cloud instance since January 2023. My warning to you is this. Whatever you do, and I seriously mean this because I'm not that guy, I'm an ethical, go-by-the-books person. Do not click that URL or put it in. Well, the reason I put the X's in, because if you do, it will install without clicking a remote install agent on your computer. And it's a frame, right? I can inject that via frame without ever downloading, right? So let's talk about social engineering. What is social engineering? Tactic of manipulating, influencing, deceiving a victim in order to gain control, steal personal financial information. It uses psychological manipulation to trick users into making security mistakes, right? So if I can register your old domain, send somebody that cross-site scripting payload, and load it off of your what used to be your FQDN, that's barely social engineering. The agent doesn't have any framing investigations, right? So why not start injecting a frame instead? So my payload is actually serving an iframe, but I use the hidden tag, right? You inject the frame, it automatically downloads, all of that gets bypassed. That's literally how you do it. It's barely social engineering at this point, right? So what if you have some companies sniffing around your work and you don't want them finding it? Well, the simple elaboration for tradecraft is just to use the hidden tag. So if anybody actually finds that page, they won't actually see it. And the psychological trick of all of this is what? I have total control of the HTML content in there. It doesn't check SSRF, any of that, to GET request. So I simply just started rewriting the web page. At the bottom of that, it says, please wait while the Port Connect client is downloaded to your computer. So my trick is I send it to a port test page and say it's an installable port testing module. They download the agent and it loads on my machine, gives me full system access to the endpoint. Don't believe me? Give this video a watch. So this is me grabbing the URL as if I would send it to somebody, putting it in here, and it's the same thing you're seeing. See how it says 666? I'm just showing you what the URL is. There's no tricks up my sleeve. I'm not playing any games. Hit enter. And I'm showing you this. All of the antivirus is turned on this computer. All of the controls are there, right? It just downloaded, right? Open it up. Well, I'll refresh it here just to show you that's how it downloads. Open it up. That's the HTTP request executing. I'm going to show you the details, and you're going to see that's all the content I put in there. I injected from my server, right? Launch it one more time. Here's the important part. See this right here? You'll see it in a second. I need to hurry up. It's about 6 months ago on this. That's signed by their controlled thing. Running that, it looks fine. And now what am I doing? I'm waiting for my attacker to connect to the machine because it's calling back to my rogue Connectwise instance in their cloud that I signed up for anonymously, and it's loading up stuff on their computer as system. That's how it's done. Like I said, thank you. And there it is. And literally from this, you now have access to everything. You can load everything up. And if you go back and read like the Iranian APTs, this is exactly their trampoline into everything else. It'll either stay once, or if on my end, I just click persist, maintain a shell, it'll do it. So cool, thank you for the applause. That's great. Dude, really, that was a moment for me because I worked really hard on this and it was a really rough time. I successfully exploited it, but there's more. I'm not telling everything. I'm just going to show you some stuff. Connectwise applications, even beyond this, use a client application that is really just a wrapped web browser. You can figure this out by looking at their webpage and they parse what the user agent tags are. That client is absolutely exploitable because it's an old browser, but nobody realizes it's a browser. So there are tons of ways of going through Connectwise, not this, the other parts of the system, to deliver client-side exploits without user interaction. That's one thing. I'm not sharing that yet because it's cool and it's another cool thing that nobody's ever done before. Now, I want you to think, and this is the important part, I want you to think about this as application developers. Who leaves debugging symbols on when you compile code? So the click once installer that they provided, if you carve through the metadata, software bill of materials, software supply chain attacks, all that stuff I do, what they've left in here was the absolute drive path, including username for the profile, source, stream connect work, MISC, bootstrapper, release, click once runner. The source is where the source code is stored, right? I have a username of somebody who can actually get to that and compiles it. I know what they're doing, and I'm going to mic drop after the next slide on this. There is a lot of metadata embedded in their software and applications that will allow you to map their internal network. This is the thing I'll come out is, I love attacking developers and I love exploiting developer weaknesses because you all have something like this, right? So, wrapping up. Should companies, and this is where it comes down to, this is all cool, this is new stuff, whatever. It's like, one, should companies be responsible, and that's the question I get, responsible for their own disclosure analysis of vulnerabilities? I don't know. I can tell you that I shouldn't have been the person that registered the CVEs, and it certainly wasn't overblown in my eyes. So here's my trick I'm going to tell you. Learn how the CVE system reporting works. So if a company is a CNA, and they won't give you your CVE, what you can do is go to MITRE, who's a CNA of last resort, and they'll issue it to you if you're correct, which is why I went to MITRE. So if you're a bug hunter or somebody who's doing this and the program won't give it to you, you can just go to MITRE and say, rectify this for me.
Austin's Hacker Association also do it.
Yes, you were just certified. Yes, yes, follow that. A magic bullet of this isn't a big deal, won't fix anything. All of you need to start thinking holistically how the system gets put together. Because like I said, it's an application problem, it's the network problem, but it's really a lack of understanding. But two last things, I'll get off, give me 2 seconds. Bug bounty programs and responsible disclosure are totally killing employment in the industry because why would anybody hire you full time when they can get the milk for free? Or for a t-shirt and $500? If you want more jobs in this industry, stop taking the quick payday. Put your CVEs that you register on your resume, and that is money that will pay off on your salary for the rest of your life. Trust me, I've got hundreds. Last thing I'll say this. Ask yourself this. I'm not a bad person. I don't turn bad. But think about it this way as all of you. If I have to stare these people down, fly out to Las Vegas, do a press, whatever, just for a few words of acknowledgement on a website, why would I ever help them again? Think about that as an application designer. Be more open. Thank you very much, guys. That puts everybody else at risk. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.